back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley in Washington, D.C., recommending, as always, Tarpley.net. That's also where you can find all of my books, Surviving the Cataclysm, Obama the Postmodern Coup, the unauthorized biography of Barack H. Obama, 9/11 Synthetic Terror Made in USA, the unauthorized biography of George Bush the Elder, plus translations in French, Spanish, Italian, Japanese, German, modern Greek edition coming up fairly soon. So in terms of the U.S. effort in Afghanistan, today at the National Press Club, General McCaffrey, commentator for CNN, was there, and I had occasion to ask him, General, what about what the Taliban are saying about the real purpose of this operation? And he said, well, the Marines have carried on all kinds of psy-war and deception. They have been announcing an attack on Marja for the last 6 to 9 months, and now they've finally done it. So the Taliban was fooled anyway. I don't know. But perhaps the most dramatic thing McCaffrey said today is that in the springtime, which means in about a month, the U.S. casualty rate in Afghanistan will rise to 200 to 500 a month. That's killed, wounded, and missing, presumed captured, all three, 200 to 500 a month. You're talking about 10 casualties to 15 to 17 per day, a heavy toll coming up. And this is an authoritative source. I'm sure he sits in on all the briefings at the Pentagon. So other than this, what do we know? U.S. naval presence in the Gulf seems to be quite robust. I think 2 battle groups now and another one coming in the near future. But it's on the ground that they're having trouble. We've heard that Gates has read the Riot Act to the European NATO allies. Where are the troops we need for the Afghanistan meat grinder? The Dutch government has collapsed. Balkenende, the reactionary neocon, left over from the Bush era, because the Labour Party of the Netherlands said no to this useless sacrifice of Dutch troops. That government has now fallen, and I guess they're headed towards early elections. Ambassador Holbrooke is in desperation going to Tiflis, Georgia, to try to get Georgian troops from the fascist madman dictator Saakashvili to try to beef up the NATO presence in Afghanistan. So they are scraping the bottom of the barrel. They're going to the Georgian toy army as distinct from these other NATO armies, which are at least relatively serious. So Holbrooke is having to go outside of NATO because, thank God, the Georgians are not yet members of NATO, nor should they ever be. Notice also the plan to expand NATO into Ukraine is now a dead duck, with Yanukovych, the pro-Moscow candidate, or even just normal Ukrainian reasonable self-interest. The color revolution crowd with Yushchenko and Timoshenko, the gas princess, they're out. They're finished. Timoshenko has thrown in the towel. So right now, there's not going to be an extension of Ukraine into NATO. Very interesting to keep score. U.S. color revolution in Ukraine rolled back after 6 years. Color revolution in Iran failing, sputtering, fizzling. And now this rebellion by Pakistan, and we're seeing that in the most distant corners of the empire where the U.S. had pushed itself forward relentlessly, that we're seeing signs of weakness on the limes, right, on the imperial frontier, or even beyond the frontier. The ability to project subversion into a country like Iran seems to be declining. So you got all kinds of troubles in NATO, and this reported coup d'etat attempted by the Turkish generals. Now, the coup d'etat itself, Operation Sledgehammer, I think, 2003. But right now, a purge of the Turkish army by the civilian government, as far as we can see. Certainly going to have to study that one, but it shows that all is not well in the NATO house of cards. Things are decidedly on the dicey side, so we should look at this. The other thing I would point to is this really monstrous propaganda exercise by CNN, which aired last Saturday and Sunday evenings, and this is Cyber Attack, We Were Warned, a really interesting attempt to recycle all of the old plug uglies of the 9/11 Commission and related times from the Bush administration. This is an exercise, a war game in effect, being held at the Bipartisan Institute. That sounds awful. And the idea is that the U.S. is under cyber attack, so you have a fake meeting of the National Security Council with Chertoff, the profiteer, right, the guy who wants to have everybody appear on full body scans because he gets a rake-off on everyone he sells. Chertoff is the head of the National Security Council. Jamie Gorelick, the CIA representative on the Kane-Hamilton 9/11 Commission, she's the Attorney General. Joe Lockhart, the press attaché of the Clinton White House, is a counselor to the president. John Death Squad's Negroponte he's the Secretary of State. A lot of these characters really from the invisible government. Bennett Johnson, former senator, is the Secretary of Energy. Fran Townsend, Bush, the younger veteran, is the Department of Homeland Security. And McLaughlin, the former head of the CIA, is the Director of National Intelligence. So they go through a scenario where something called March Madness begins to attack cell phones. They eventually find that came from Sudan, interesting, main source of Chinese oil in Africa so far, probably 7% of Chinese oil coming from Port Sudan. And then after the attack on the cell phone system, it kicks over from the cell phone system into the Internet. That begins to shut down air traffic control, airports shut down, trains cannot travel. And then it begins to attack the electrical grid, and you get all kinds of panic. You get the U.S. grinding to a halt, National Guard sent in, everything militarized. And I think the important point is China is mentioned, but the country that is targeted overwhelmingly in this simulation, broadcast on CNN last Saturday and Sunday, is Russia, because it turns out that the way that you see this virus is your screen begins to show footage of the Russian Red Army marching along with appropriate military music, and they say the server that is the source of all this is located in Irkutsk, I think in Siberia, but certainly in Russia. So the interesting thing about this is that it takes the language of confrontation and retaliation from the Cold War, the sort of straight Dr. Strangelove vocabulary of nuclear deterrence and first strike and second strike, and it translates that into the terms of cyber warfare. And there's a question at one point, the people in this fake National Security Council chaired by Chertoff are asked, well, could this just be the Taliban? Not the Taliban, but Al-Qaeda. Could this not be bin Laden and his group? And essentially, this is dismissed with a certain amount of scorn, saying, well, those guys all live in caves. How could they do that? So the mythology is now being dumped. Naturally, if they live in caves, which I don't think they do, but if they live in caves, they can't do it. Neither can they do 9/11, and they can't do this cyber attack. So there's an attempt to shift, to revamp, to rework the mythology and the meme to suit this cyber stuff. Target Russia. We'll be back in a minute.